Okay, let's dive into this, because we're looking at a truly fascinating story today. It's one that completely exposes the massive gap between a manufactured historical image and, well, actual reality. We're talking about William Henry Harrison. He's a guy who was often remembered way more for the political spin surrounding him than for who he actually was. So let's break down this myth and uncover the reality of his legacy. To really get this myth, we've got to start with a spectacularly bad political miscalculation. Back in 1840, a Democratic newspaper published this totally foolish jibe. They basically mocked Harrison, saying that if you just gave him a barrel of hard cider and a $2,000 pension, he'd happily sit by a fire and study moral philosophy. They were trying to insult him, right? Make him look out of touch and lazy, but instead of getting defensive, the Whig Party looked at that and said, "We'll take it." They completely leaned into it, and in doing so, inadvertently created one of the absolute greatest political myths in American history. The Whigs basically weaponized that insult. They completely rebranded Harrison for the 1840 election. In their messaging, they fabricated this everyman image, a rugged, simple frontiersman living in a humble log cabin, drinking his everyday hard cider. And they did this to set up a sharp, deliberate contrast with his opponent, Martin Van Buren. They painted Van Buren as this out-of-touch, champagne-sipping aristocrat. And honestly, it was an incredibly effective narrative. Section 1. The real William Henry Harrison. Now, here is where it gets really interesting, because the irony of his true background is just staggering. Harrison was absolutely not a simple frontiersman born in a log cabin. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. He was born on February 9, 1773, at the Berkeley Plantation. He was quite literally the scion of the Virginia planter aristocracy, born into one of the state's wealthiest slave-owning families. And rather than some rough-and-tumble frontier upbringing, he studied the classics in history at Hampton-Sydney College and even went on to study medicine. So yeah, a highly educated aristocrat through and through. Section 2. Expanding the Northwest Territory. Let's move to his early career and see how this builds. His rise was incredibly rapid. In 1791, he gets commissioned as an ensign in the 1st Infantry of the Regular Army and heads out to the Northwest. He even served as aide-de-camp to General Mad Anthony Wayne at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which is what opened most of the Ohio area to settlement. On a more personal note, he married Anna Tuthell Sims in 1795, and they'd eventually have 10 children. But after resigning from the Army in 1798, his political career just took off. He becomes Secretary of the Northwest Territory, its first delegate to Congress, and helps divide the territory. By 1801, he's appointed governor of the newly formed Indiana Territory, a job he'd hold for 12 years. As governor, Harrison had a very clear mandate: secure more land for white settlers. He aggressively negotiated treaties, grabbing millions of acres for basically pennies. But, this expansionist mandate collided head-on with Native American peoples who were, understandably, actively resisting displacement. Enter Tecumseh. He was an incredibly eloquent and energetic Shawnee chief who, along with his religious brother, the Prophet, had a completely opposing goal. They wanted to strengthen a Native American confederation to stop any further encroachment. So we're looking at an absolutely inevitable clash of objectives here. Section 3. Tecumseh and Tippecanoe. By 1809, things were getting incredibly tense. Native Americans were either flat-out refusing Harrison's cheap treaties or actively attacking the expanding settlements. So in 1811, Harrison gets permission to attack the Confederacy, and here's exactly how that unfolded. Step 1. While Tecumseh was actually away looking for more allies, Harrison marched roughly 1,000 men toward the Native American settlement known as Prophetstown. Step 2. They meet and agree to a ceasefire, supposedly to wait until Tecumseh gets back, but that ceasefire fell apart immediately. Because, Step 3, the very next morning, November 7, Native American warriors launch a total surprise attack on Harrison's camp, right on the Tippecanoe River. So the crucial point is that number right there, 190. After some really heavy fighting, Harrison did manage to push the attack back, but his forces suffered 190 dead and wounded. It became known as the Battle of Tippecanoe. Sure, it was a tactical victory for him, but it came with a huge, heavy toll. And the battle definitely didn't bring peace. After driving the warriors off, Harrison and his men just burned Prophetstown straight to the ground. But that destruction didn't break the resistance. It actually fueled it. The violence just kept escalating right into the spring of 1812, with Tecumseh and his remaining allies carrying out intense raids against white settlements. Section 4.
The War of 1812.
This escalating local violence soon bled into a much wider international conflict. During the War of 1812, Harrison's military career really reached its peak. He was given command of the army in the Northwest and promoted to brigadier general. His defining moment happened on October 5, 1813, at the Battle of the Thames, just north of Lake Erie. There, he decisively defeated a combined force of British and Native American fighters. But the most significant outcome? Tecumseh was killed in that battle. His death permanently shattered the delicate Native American alliance he had worked so hard to build, and they would never again offer serious resistance in the Northwest.
Section 5. A complicated political rise.
With his military reputation totally locked in, Harrison pivoted back to politics, which brings us full circle toward that famous 1840 election. But as his national profile grew, he had to navigate a really divided country, especially with his careful and, frankly, contradictory stance on slavery. See, on one hand, he was a slave owner who actively opposed Congress restricting slavery in new territories. But as his career advanced, he carefully avoided openly condemning the institution, basically just professing that the states themselves should be the ones to decide its fate.
Despite all those complexities, the Whig Party nominates him in 1840. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of that log cabin and hard cider myth we talked about earlier. Get this, Harrison actually won the popular vote by a super slim margin, less than 150,000 votes. Yet, with heavy support from western and southern states, he captured the Electoral College in an absolute landslide, 234-60 over Van Buren. The manufactured narrative worked flawlessly.
Section 6. First president to die. So, Harrison achieves the highest office in the land. But what comes next is the incredibly abrupt and tragic conclusion to his life, a twist literally no one in the Whig Party saw coming. When Harrison arrived in Washington in February 1841, he brought this highly ornate inaugural address, totally packed with classical Roman history allusions. He lets Massachusetts Senator Daniel Webster edit it, which gives us this wonderfully funny anecdote. Webster apparently bragged afterward, in a jolly fashion, that he had chopped so much out of it, claiming he had killed 17 Roman proconsuls as dead as smelts, every one of them. And Webster had reason to be pleased with the final cut. Harrison used the address to lay out a heavily nationalistic vision, emphasizing that he'd be obedient to the will of the people as expressed through Congress. But he'd never get the chance to act on any of it. Before he'd even been in office for a single month, Harrison became severely ill. He died at the White House on April 4, 1841. Which brings us to the ultimate historical irony. William Henry Harrison became the first United States president to die in office. The Whigs had engineered this massive, totally narrative-driven victory, putting literally all their hopes onto this one candidate. And just like that, in a matter of weeks, they lost their president, and with him, their entire political agenda. After all that spin, the log cabin myths, the frontier battles, and the massive landslide, it all just vanished in a month. So I'm going to leave you with this massive historical what-if to ponder. How might American history have fundamentally shifted if the first president to die in office had actually lived to enact the Whig program? It is an absolutely fascinating question to consider. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.